Hello and a very warm welcome to the Ideas Factory. I'm Nakma. Joining me is Professor Harsh Pant. We had a very interesting and surprising visit by the American President Joe Biden to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. It was an unannounced visit. It was a surprise and a secret visit. When he landed there in Kyiv, he made a statement and reiterated American stand and also America's support to Ukraine in Ukraine's war with Russia. So President Biden once again announced that 1 year later, Kyiv stands, Ukraine stands, and democracy stands. And while giving out this message, he made a very strong statement and a strong message to Russia. What we will be looking at on this episode of the Ideas Factory of how is the world divided as far as the Russia-Ukraine conflict is, and it's soon going to be an year of the conflict since Russia started the aggression. So on 24th of February, 1 year. But at the same time, US and China are almost at a tipping point. We will be looking at that too. And of course, the earthquake in Turkey and the role that India has played there. So the India-Turkey relationship also we will be looking at. Thank you so much for joining us, Harsh. Let's start by the very surprising and highly risky, highly secretive, unannounced visit to Kyiv by President Joe Biden just as it was going to be 1 year of the aggression, of the Russian aggression. So he landed there. In fact, he took a train journey to reach Kyiv from Warsaw. And while there, he announced and reiterated American stand. What is the strong message that is giving out to Russia and to the world? And how do you see the camps divided once again and no sign of this war coming to an end?
Thanks, Nagma. The procedural aspects of this visit will keep us enthralled for a very long time. Perhaps the secrecy, the way it was managed, in fact, stage managed, the way it was taken care of, both in terms of communications, both with the Ukrainians as well as the Russians. They were informed that that nothing untoward should happen, and just a few hours before Biden was supposed to land, Russians were brought on board. So I think in the way these things are done, it tells you its own story. But I think certainly the larger message, and particularly at a time when we are entering the second year of this conflict with no signs of resolution anywhere close, the message was for multiple audiences. And I think Biden with this message was first of all reiterating American commitment to Ukraine, because many in Ukraine perhaps would be wary of how long the support would last, how long they can rely on the US as the most important pillar of their war fighting strength. How far will the Americans go? And I think Biden visiting Kyiv, I think made it very clear that he intends to stand by Ukrainians for as long as it takes, is the message that is coming out from Washington. And of course, announcement of a separate package, but also in the last few months, we have seen announcement of high-end technology, both in terms of tanks, etc., and as well as logistics and ammunition support. All that indicates a desire in the American establishment to see the war through, so long as the Ukrainians want to fight it. And I think the framing of this around democracy is very important. And I think that was the message that went from Biden's visit, that he was standing in solidarity with a fellow democracy who had come under assault from an authoritarian state like Russia. So the symbolism of this visit at this particular time, and the message that emanated from it for Ukraine, the message for Russia equally clear, that Americans will continue to take this war forward with their support, and they have no intention of backing down anytime soon. The message to, I think, Europeans, many European countries that are debating the longevity of this war, the message was for them that America intends once again to take this war to its logical conclusion, and therefore transatlantic partnership is a very key pillar of this. engagement, and the message, of course, finally to American domestic audience that look, this is again a president who is defining his legacy as many American presidents in recent years have done as a wartime president, that he's fighting a war on a foreign soil. He intends to be that leader who's out there. And of
Yes.
course, at a time when there are concerns about his own presidential bid, how suitable he is at this age, I think he has laid those questions to rest that he intends to see it through. So I think multiple messages for multiple audiences, but certainly a visit that comes at a very, very important time in this conflict. But it has sent out a message that this war is not going to come to any conclusion anytime soon.
Of course. So he is trying to give many messages to multiple audience, but his choice of making a surprise historic visit in an active war zone, what did he really achieve? You spoke about a very strong signal to Russia, of course, and also the domestic audience and his own presidency. But back home, Biden's trip has been praised a lot. I mean, there have been statements saying bravo, but there have also been criticism from conservative Republicans. So how
Indeed,
was
I
it?
think,
Yes,
yeah. I mean, and see, we know that Republicans, a section of the Republicans, have been very critical of the seemingly never-ending, unending support for Kyiv, for Ukraine. And I think the questions that are being asked is how long will this war be funded? What kind of resources America is going to continue to expend on this war? And those are questions that have been part of the American domestic political debate since Afghanistan and Iraq wars. In fact, there has been a constituency that have always been questioning the logic of what have been termed as never-ending wars. And so, even in this case, now we have had a very strong group of Republicans who continue to ask questions about the future of their engagement in Ukraine, and what are the parameters through which one should evaluate American engagement. Now, those are, I think, questions that all democracies ask, and all democracies, you would expect all democracies to engage with some of those issues. But what makes it interesting is that you also have a situation where Trump is also trying to resurrect his dwindling political fortunes, and his take on previous wars has always been very different. So it would be interesting to see how because he's also now making his bid for the next round of elections, how he portrays this, but also the group of conservative Republicans who have questioned this will question this, will
of
take this
course,
forward. But also
of
there are
course.
progressives within the Democratic Party who have been very, very critical of previous wars. They have been quiet so far because the framing of this as a war to protect democracy in Europe has somehow silenced them. But they are also there. They've also questioned it in the past, and they are also likely to question this seemingly open-ended support to Ukraine. But I think what Biden has done is to basically make a strong commitment as far as America is concerned, as far as the Washington establishment is concerned, that he at least has no intention of backing down as far as his support for Ukraine is concerned.
Yes, of course. Some people have criticized it, calling it but like you said, there are a handful of Republicans, and they've said that this is incredibly insulting that the president shows up in Ukraine but does not do the same here in America, especially in Ohio, East Palestine, where a train carrying hazardous chemical derailed earlier this month. So there have been those criticisms there. While he is there, Zelensky has also made a very interesting statement. Rather, he has warned China against supporting Russia and says that doing so would bring on a world war. So how do you look at Zelensky's statement now, also because the US, China, earlier also we've seen US warning China of not supporting Russia, China increasingly coming in support of, or rather in Russia's camp, even though China has publicly very clearly stated that it does not want the war. But we know how the camps are divided.
I think it points to this growing polarization in global politics, and China and Russia, of course, have a very are moving towards a relationship that perhaps we did not think it would come to this a few years back. But certainly now, with the Ukraine war and with the kind of isolation that in some ways from the West, both Russia and China are facing, and there's a strategic logic to their coming together to protect their interests, and that's what we are witnessing. But China has been very careful so far. China has, of course, made these statements about that they don't want to see a prolonged war. They have been very, very vocal on the nuclear dynamic of this conflict, where they have made very strong comments that nuclear weapons should not be brought into the picture. They have also suggested that they would like to see a resolution as soon as possible. But of course, their primary equity is with the Soviet, with Russians. They would and they have said that, look, they do not see this conflict and this war as something that Russians have provoked. They have put the blame on the West. They are insisting that that any kind of support that the West is giving and providing, both logistical and moral, is prolonging the conflict. So from Beijing's perspective, the primary onus of this conflict lies in the West, and they should own up and desist. And now there are these suggestions that China is moving from that position where last year their foreign minister was saying there is no question of even one bullet going to Russia. Today, there are suggestions that Chinese are considering even lethal aid to Russia. And I think that is where a lot of concern is coming as far as West is concerned. Because if lethal aid starts going from China to Russia, it will certainly boost up Russia's morale. And it would also make it imperative for the West to raise the stakes for China, which they don't want to do at the moment. Despite all the challenges that they are facing with China, we saw that Anthony Blinken sat down with his Chinese counterpart at the Munich Security Conference to discuss a range of issues. Now, of course, those discussions did not yield much, but they have been keeping the channels of communication open. But this idea repeatedly now made by European Union, by Washington, and now by Zelensky himself, that Chinese providing lethal aid would be crossing a red line, is the West drawing a very, very strong line under the sand and saying that if this happens, China will face consequences, because I think the West also realizes that this would shift the war, shift this crisis into a very, very different and dangerous zone.
Of course, but at the same time, America promising further aid, ammunition, pledging more money to Ukraine around this time, and also, President Biden being there and reiterating the American stand or the American support for Ukraine. So clearly, the conflict is not coming to an end anytime soon. There have been no chances of any negotiation, and we see that we probably. There'll be more tension. The conflict will continue as we move on in this year after an year. But like you pointed out, Secretary Blinken has met with the Chinese counterpart, a senior Chinese diplomat at the Munich conference. After the spy balloon incident, and there seems to be tension between the two countries, the Chinese have called the American reaction hysterical and said that America has been doing so for a long time, over many, many countries all around the world, spying. And Washington has been accused of double standards. So China and US are almost at a tipping point. So first of all, there is a China-US conflict here back home. The relationship, then of course the Ukraine conflict, where again China and US are on two opposite ends. So how do we look at this? It's escalating, the tension is escalating further, and this balloon incident may also, do you see the tension may further escalate there? Or do you now see as this settling down, as both countries are trying to settle down, though nothing very positive has come out of the talks?
I think, Nama, your last question about Zelensky is very important in this context, because Zelensky is making an important point that whatever the state of the conflict over the last year, the world continued to look at it as a Eurasian conflict. It was restricted to Eurasia. If China enters it, if China provides lethal aid to Russia, you would have the first time an Indo-Pacific country entering directly into the conflict. And I think that's where his suggestion that this becomes a much broader war or a conflict is a very important point to consider. That the broadening of this conflict, you know, you remember Dr. Jaishankar saying that
Ji.
this is Europe's problem, and I
Yeah.
think China entering it in this way makes it a bigger and almost a problem at a world scale. And therefore, I think for everyone, this is a huge issue that we are now not only scaling up individual support for countries, but we are also looking at the geographical expansion of this conflict, which will have very, very strong consequences and serious consequences for various countries, even in the Indo-Pacific. And I think this sense, therefore, of Blinken and his Chinese counterpart not really engaging with each other, despite trying to sit together at Munich Security Conference, again underscores how the relationship has been deteriorating between these two major global powers at a time when West's engagement, West's relations with the other Eurasian disruptive power, Russia, is also at its lowest step. So you have now this very interesting combination of crises emerging. That, of course, there is a war going on in Europe, but if you look at US-China relationship, despite all the efforts, and before that balloon incident, Blinken was supposed to travel to Beijing, and the idea was to tone down the tensions and to tone down the rhetoric, and make and to let the conflict, competition not escalate into conflict. This was the whole sense behind what Blinken was trying to do. Now, once the balloon episode spiraled into something which became a domestic political issue in the US, which also became an issue across the world because countries started looking at this new kind of gray zone warfare that China is employing against a number of countries. I think Chinese position became very tenuous on this issue, and of course, they have not denied what they have been doing in the US. What they've said is that the reaction from the US was what they've called hysterical, but that does not take away from the point from this aspect that the relationship has been going downhill for a very long time, and by using or by engaging in this balloon incident at this particular point in time, perhaps Chinese have further derailed any prospect of stabilization. So what we are looking at is almost the crisis that is almost global in scale. Between you have West and Russia on the one hand, and US and China on the other in the Indo-Pacific, and if you meld the two geographies together, it's virtually a veritable world crisis, and that I think is something that's something the world should really take seriously, given that we are entering into a very, very dangerous phase in the Ukraine conflict as well.
Yeah, of course, there are no signs of the conflict easing out. Rather, the scale is increasing, as you pointed out. And at the same time, the last question here I have on this episode of Ideas Factory is related to Pakistan, a neighborhood, which is, in fact, the defense minister, I remember sometimes back, maybe 2 days back, had commented that we're already bankrupt. The country is already bankrupt. IMF, at the same time, has advised Shahbaz Sharif that on running the nation, and has also reminded that the rich need to be taxed more. The subsidies need to be given only to the poor people. So Pakistan's situation right now is very, very dire, and it's drowning in an ocean of troubles. I mean, you look at the economy, the prices of goods going up, the fuel prices, and the crisis that is there. And of course, along with an economic crisis is the other problem that Pakistan is dealing with, which is, of course, terrorism, and keeping that in check. But right now, looking at the IMF statement, how do we see situation panning out here in Pakistan?
Yeah, indeed, a very serious situation for Pakistan, and I think the inability of the political elites in Pakistan to come to even some sort of an informal understanding on what seemed to be almost existential crisis that Pakistan is facing is very, very is serious, because ultimately competitive populism is not going to solve Pakistan's problems. But that's exactly what Pakistan seems to be caught in, this loop of devil. It's caught between the devil and the deep sea. If it takes the measures that IMF is suggesting, then of course the cost of living crisis would spiral, and in the absence of any political consensus, the political opposition would certainly make life miserable for the governing coalition. Now, that therefore it makes it imperative for the opposition and the government to sit together and frame a collective national response, and that's exactly what is not happening, and that is also then leading IMF to question the ability of Pakistan to pull through the crisis, and therefore they are also not coming into the picture. So I think you have this spiral of problems which are dragging Pakistan downwards every single day. And this is going to have serious consequences for Pakistan, and of course for the region, given that the destabilization of Pakistan will lead to all kinds of non-state actors that are going to not only use Pakistan at this time of great instability, but also then project their radical ideas or extremist ideas from that territory. So I think it's a serious problem, and unfortunately, the solutions lie only in the hands of Pakistan. No one else can do very much about it.
Of course, and that's a dangerous situation, not only for Pakistan, but as you pointed out, for the region, because destabilization of Pakistan will lead to the encouragement of the non-state actors. And that, of course, is not a good news for the region. That's all that we have time for on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you so much for joining, Harsh. And thank you all, our audience, for watching us. Do join us again on the next episode. Thank you.